The Deep End team acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands on which we work and live, pays respect to elders past, present and future, and recognises the importance of Indigenous knowledge to informing public debate. In today's episode of The Deep End, we speak with Asmi Wood. Asmi Wood is a professor and the Subdean Indigenous in the College of Law at the Australian National University. His research and publications mainly concern constitutional recognition for Indigenous people in Australia and Indigenous participation in higher education. The Australian Parliament, government agencies, community organisations, schools and Indigenous groups regularly use his research.
You'll push for time.
He won the 2015 Neville Bonner Award for Indigenous Education.
So, welcome, Asmi, to the Deep End podcast hosted by Aaron Corn and myself. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on our podcast, and your great legal expertise and experience as both a legal scholar and, of course, a Torres Strait Islander man will bring some enlightenment, I hope, to our listeners today. We're coming to you from Bunurong Wurundjeri country at the Victorian College of the Arts here in Naarm in Melbourne at South Bank. So, Asmi, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you became a lawyer.
It was actually accidental, to be honest. I started off in medicine and didn't like it, to be honest. I did 3 years. This was in the old days where you had to do a med degree, but you did a lot of science at the start, which was okay and they encouraged me to do that because of language issues. But I'd always wanted to study law, and after 3 years, maybe they thought my English was okay and allowed me to move into law. So yes, I always wanted to do it, and I think it was mainly because I remember reading Malcolm X, where he said the English have colonized using their language and their law, and you will never extricate yourself from that mess if you don't understand their language and if you don't understand their law. I think that had always stuck in my mind as something that we need to do to get ourselves into a better position. I'm not sure we can get out of it completely so quickly, but and of course we are very grateful to people like yourself who've done a lot. I think Malcolm X didn't have a lot of people ahead of him doing these kinds of things. They were in the forefront, just like you have been. So it's a lot easier. Maybe not a lot easier. People say it's not a lot easier, but I think it's a lot easier for my generation because of people like yourself who've sort of at least broken the ice to a large extent and made these issues visible, put the items on the table and drawn out significant disparities between how black and white are treated on this continent. So using the law to sharpen some of those points, I guess, is what we've done as lawyers.
So you're from the Torres Strait Islands. Tell us about the Torres Strait Islands and your culture and your people.
I was on what they call a mainlander who was removed from my grandparents. I think were removed from the islands and brought to the mainland as I don't know what, as workers, as all sorts of things. I grew up on Vic country, and sorry, I need to acknowledge that I am speaking to you from Ngambri Ngunnawal land, where I live and work. And that was an opportunity. There were a lot of Torres Strait Islander people there. I think a lot of them worked on the railways and all sorts of things. So Creole was spoken widely. The Western Torres Strait Creole was spoken widely, but they also spoke a mixture of Vic and Yidinji and all those other different languages. So we grew up with the smattering of a knowledge of these different languages and cultures. But unfortunately, I don't think we were immersed deeply enough into our laws, into the deep thinking of our elders, because they were trying to eke out a living, and having the privilege now, I guess, to look back and think and reflect on issues that touch on our past and on our laws and our ontologies is perhaps a useful thing, but I would have appreciated having a much better base or deeper base knowledge of these things.
So was this like an indentured labour sort of arrangement? Torres Strait Islanders who were brought to the mainland? Is that what it was, or was it some other sort of arrangement?
I don't think it was called indentured labour, but I think the outcome was not dissimilar.
Yeah.
I think people were paid, notionally paid. Clearly, they weren't paid according to white standards.
Right.
But I don't think they were given all the money either. I think there was these, elders didn't talk to young people about money much. It was not considered a good thing to do. And I think they were too worried about, just as I said before, eking out an existence to worry too much about the fine aspects of life. But I think from what I can remember, people were not treated very well. But I think the beauty of, I'm not saying anything about Torres Strait Islander cultures, but about Aboriginal cultures, is how the women in those areas in the north didn't give a toss about whether you were black, white, or brindle. They treated you really well. There was a deep sense of love that the women mainly exhibited towards all children. I don't remember feeling different to Aboriginal children when I was young, and a sense of welcome that is very different to what you feel in the South. Speaking about the voice, I remember I have been doing some town halls, and somebody said to me, you people are so ungrateful. If you don't like it here, you should go back somewhere else. And I said to him, where would you like us to go? I mean, this is the whole point. And he spoke with a very strong English accent. And I said, you are from somewhere else. I can tell where you are. I think, your voice sounds like you're from near Sheffield, up there. And do you want me to go to your country because you've come to live here? Like, the complete lack of understanding is very different to what you experience with Aboriginal people. Yeah.
It's true, isn't it? I mean, I've run into this here at the University of Melbourne. One of our Scottish colleagues in the medical faculty was objecting at a cultural awareness day, or I don't think it was even a cultural awareness day. I think it was a general staff meeting, saying that he wasn't responsible for what happened to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here, and he wasn't going to be made to feel guilty about it. What that tells me is that he knows absolutely nothing about what happened to us here, and that he thinks it's okay to come here to our country and draw a line under the past and create a future for himself here without any regard for the history of this country and the place where he is and the original owners of this country. And then there's the example that you've given of a person who doesn't even understand that this is our home, this is our homeland. So I'm particularly astonished. I mean, I think the big learning for me during this campaign is how, despite our entire lives being dedicated to teaching Australians about who we are and why they should have some respect for us, it seems that there's a substantial majority who have no idea who we are, whose country they're in, and why they should acknowledge us. Is this your experience?
Absolutely, and I think as with that person who the Scotsman who said that to you, they have no experience of life. I mean, they are really happy to accept the wealth, the privileges that are underpinned by theft, and carry on blithely as if there was that this magically appeared and was laid out for a table for them, on a table for them, you know. And when I asked them the question, so where do you think all this came from? You're not responsible here, but you're responsible for using what is in effect stolen property. I said, under the law, when you have discovered that something is stolen, it is returned to the original owner. You are consuming it, and you're denying that this was stolen. So, you know, this is a huge lack of insight on your part, or willful blindness that, you know, shouldn't be excused for an adult, a person of your age. Yeah.
You're very familiar with all the special laws applying to us Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and the discriminatory clauses in the Constitution, and how our proposal for recognition through establishing a voice would give us a small say in how the Parliament and the executive government make laws and policies for us. Could we please have your perspective on the discrimination in the Constitution, the present discrimination in the Constitution, and how, by having a voice, should the referendum be successful, we might be able to achieve some equality for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people?
Thank you, Professor Langton. So the issue of race in the Constitution was something that the founders had introduced from the very beginning. So when you hear people saying that the voice will reintroduce race into the Constitution, I'm really not sure what they're talking about. Many of them haven't even read it. So, you know, when you ask them, so can you tell me where this is going to go in, and you say re-racialized, when was it taken out, they have no idea. So I think they're just repeating a lot of things that they've heard without any knowledge on where these are based. So the founders really created the racist power, the race power, for inferior races other than Aboriginal people, to be honest. I mean, they wanted to get rid of South Sea Islanders and Afghans and God knows whoever else who was not white. They had the good grace to exclude Aboriginal people from this. So while they wanted to keep the continent white, they were hoping we would die out, but not be deported. The difference with the 21st century is, in the Love and Tom's case, is that the present generation of politicians sought to do what even their most racist ancestors didn't do, and that was to use the powers to deport Aboriginal people. So in the Love and Tom's case, I'm not saying they were going to do it to every Aboriginal person on the continent, but certainly they sought to do something that even their forefathers didn't do. So race is deeply entrenched in the Constitution. It has been used many times. It has been suspended, for example, for the use in the Northern Territory interventions and other examples, through the use of the special provisions in the Racial Discrimination Act. What I think the voice would do, as you have said, it is not a huge thing. They give us very little. But what I say to people is that they lose nothing from it. It gives us a voice. It allows us to talk about things which are related to us. So the provision says that the voice may make representations. It's just 3 words that don't give you very much at all. And if they begrudge Aboriginal people even doing this, I'm not really sure what kind of people we are living with, aren't you? You know, like what kind of people are you? You would be worse than the forebears who created the Constitution. You know, at least they allowed Aboriginal people to live separately. I'm not saying segregation and all that is very, very good, but at least there was a sense of protection where people continued the laws, they continued their practices of living, they lived well. I mean, some of the documents you see, as you know, I mean, you're much more familiar with history. You see, you know, the description of Aboriginal men as being so, you know, well, you know, physically so fit and doing amazing things, navigating in ways that were not known to people in the other continents. And people like Justice Finn, who just passed away, said that the trade law that was used by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Pacific was a lex mercatoria that the Venetians would have been proud of. So, I mean, this is the kind of wealth, the richness of this continent. And yet that was turned on its head to say that these were people who lived a miserable life. That's what the founders thought. And if the people today don't allow this civilization that has been, you know, continuously on this continent for God knows how many years, the opportunity to even speak about issues that directly relate to them, I think the international community would look back on this, on the majority, and have a very, very poor opinion of the majority, and rightly so too.
Yeah, I think we're at very great risk of that. Quite a few people we've interviewed in this series so far have pointed that out.
One of the great advances that we made as ASME was as a result of one of your people, the wonderful Koiki Mabo, who, like your people, was exiled to the mainland by the Native Affairs officials, and he raised his family on the mainland, and he too worked on the railway in North Queensland. But he, of course, came to understand when he met Henry Reynolds and Noel Luce at James Cook University that his people did not own their land. He believed that they did by tradition and custom, thousands of years of tradition and custom. And it was Henry and Noel who pointed out to him that the Crown had taken his land. And so he with his fellow plaintiffs, instigated the Mabo case, and that resulted in the recognition of native title for us all. Such an extraordinary time. What a wonderful example of the judiciary, well, basically coming to their senses about nonsense like terra nullius and these dreadful attitudes that you've just described, which, you know, in colonial times and well into the 20th century held that we were savages with no laws that could be recognised. So the Mabo number 2, the decision of the High Court to recognise native title, was an extraordinary advance, but much remains to be done. But do tell us, please, about your understanding of where we are as Indigenous peoples in the Australian legal system and how the Constitution plays a role in that.
So the notion of terra nullius, which was confirmed by the Privy Council in a case called Cooper and Stewart in the 1870s, was in a sense entrenched in the Constitution in 1901, and that is what is entrenched in the Constitution. In 1992, the High Court I mean, it was an important case, but it stated the obvious, really, that there were people on this continent before the British arrived. That was known to historians, that was known to everybody, except to lawyers who, through the magic of legal fictions, were able to create the fiction that the British had settled this continent peacefully, and because it was a parcel of land that didn't have civilized human beings on it. The common law is a wonderful thing, but it can be overridden by statute. And so the Parliament in 2013 passed the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Recognition Act, which is a stronger form of recognition. But the strongest form of recognition that is available under the current Anglo-Australian system is recognition in the Constitution. It would require recognition in the Constitution, if it was to be reversed, would require a further referendum, which would rescind that provision. So having the recognition entrenched in the Constitution is a really important thing, largely because I think many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people don't really trust the government to a large extent, because people are pragmatic and they say and do things which suit them, and they're not always conscious of fact in the truer sense of the word. However, though the High Court recognized that there were people on the continent, the property law interests that were acquired through the process of colonization was kept in place. And it was left to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, unlike in other aspects of the common law, where possession is 9/10 of the law. That didn't apply to Aboriginal people. The fact that when you recognize an error, that there had been people here, that now the onus of proof should be on those who claim to have taken the land of Aboriginal people, but that was not the case. So the onus of proof was reversed. So while good things have happened, and the Mason Court did a wonderful job, and those judges, did speak the truth in the face of adversity and a difficult situation. There remains a lot to be done. Native title is a property law interest, but it is a very weak property law interest. It can be extinguished by the Crown, and many Crowns in the right of Queensland and WA have tried to do this. But for other protective measures that have been brought in through international law, that might have succeeded in those states in which the states sought to extinguish native title rights. I think the voice is a slightly different thing. A lot of money has been spent on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander affairs. The vast bulk of that majority is spent in the capital cities, in Sydney, Melbourne, Canberra, Brisbane, and maybe Perth to some extent. And these are places where you don't see too many Aboriginal people, without access to resources. Though that's not entirely true as a statement, but broadly it is true. So a lot of this money that is earmarked for Indigenous people are really spent by white people through white institutions to employ a lot of people doing this kind of work. Very little of that money actually gets to the communities. And so people say that, we are ungrateful, we are wasteful, when in reality it is them who are untruthful and wasteful. a voice would be able to tell them, this is not the way to spend the money. A better way to spend money is to target it directly at the people who need these services or whatever it is, and bring that to the attention of the government without having these multiple layers of bureaucracy and fat. So I think, contrary to what people are saying, that the voice would cost a lot of money, I think if the government wanted to save public funds, this is an ideal way of doing it, because we will speak directly to the people who are affected by government policies and legislation. And the voice would also have the opportunity to help shape and improve legislation as things are going through. Parliament is clearly not bound by whatever they say, but a sensible public sector and a sensible parliament and a sensible executive listening to good advice would not reject sensible advice. So I think everybody would benefit from having a direct voice. I mean, that's what lobbyists do anyway for other sectors. It's just that Indigenous populations don't have that level of finance and education and access at present. But this won't be the case for forever. In the next 50 years, a lot of these problems would be solved because of thanks to people like yourself who have really made the path for my generation, and even better for the generations, the generations below me. I see, our students doing incredibly well. So if Uncle Koiki had been a law student rather than a gardener at James Cook, I'm not saying that what he did was bad or anything like that. I mean, God bless him, he did everything he could, but that was the best level of access he had. And it's lucky that he met people like Henry Reynolds, because a lot of people thought that they owned the land. They said, well, we've been here all the time, nobody told us that it's not ours. But because they don't understand the fictions of law that had been created to take away their rights and their subsistence and everything that went with it, and it was done by a sleight of hand through legal fiction, people didn't understand it. So hopefully the generations that come after you, Auntie, and me, will perhaps not be in this position where we don't really understand what is happening to us in a sense, through their language, through their law, and through our understandings of how we live as well. So the voice is just the start. And when the voice is in place, and hopefully it's working really well, and I'm sure it'll have its ups and downs like everything else, but overall it is more likely to benefit people on all sides of this nation in terms of the color barrier that we experience. So yes, it's fantastic that Uncle Koiki had access to people like Henry Reynolds and others, wonderful people who spoke the truth, in spite of everything else that was told around them. But this path that has been created now allows Indigenous people themselves to occupy that space, move into that space, and to speak for people, to speak for country, to speak from what directly impacts them, rather than having other people speak for you. If this is what democracy is all about, well then, give Aboriginal people their voice as well. It is the Constitution that requires 97% of the population to determine what 3% would do. If it was democratic, we wouldn't need the 97% to vote on whether we should have a voice or not. This is not something that Aboriginal people set up. This is what the founders set up. And so to use something that the founders have put in place to deny people in the 21st century a right that everybody thinks people should have, and that is to speak for themselves, just seems to me so anachronistic.
Did you want
But
to go
because
on?
it is
Did you have
entrenched in
something
the
else to say there?
Constitution.
Did I cut you
No,
off?
I'm right. Thank you.
Okay. So I was, I think, let me get the dates right. So I was 21 and 22 years old, I think, when the Mabo II decision was handed down and the Native Title Act was promulgated the year after. And as a young Australian who knew very little about any of this stuff back then and nearly no Indigenous people, that actually felt pretty good. Like, I actually felt that I was part of a nation that had finally started to deal with its past and achieved something that could be celebrated by all. I'm just wondering where you were at in your life and career back in 92, 93, and how that impacted you. How did that make you feel at the time when those decisions were made?
So when I first went to law school, the world began in 1788. There was nothing before that, even though, you're taught in Genesis that there was a world before 1788. This law, this Anglo-Australian law just suddenly appears. It's benevolent, it is wonderful, it is humane, it subscribes to all the human rights that's possible in the world. And, we are a civilized people with a civilizing mission. And yet you hear nothing about Aboriginal people. And when you ask your teachers, so what about, how does this happen, just by magic? And they say, look, this is the way you answer your exams. You need to write it like this. Right. So you become acculturated into writing an answer that will get you the best mark, rather than encouraged to think about the wrong that you are replicating. So yes, the Mabo decision was wonderful. It's the first step in that 1,000-mile journey. But I think while the High Court gets a lot of credit, the Aboriginal people who had pushed so hard from the 80s to bring some kind of consciousness to at least the elite, if not the majority of Indigenous issues, is grossly underplayed. And while 1992 is a turning point, I mean, I look to people who were, and this is a kind of pan-Aboriginality which probably didn't exist 250 years ago, but in the society that I was raised in, that we had these great leaders, from many parts of the country, particularly women, really strong voices who spoke up, who were not afraid, who were not cowed by this, and to me that was much more attractive, because it spoke to me about a people with dignity rather than a people who were there with a hand out to with a begging bowl to receive what white largesse would give. But taking that on and saying, what can we do with this, is probably the more important question for me. So I didn't see it as a civilizing, as people suddenly realizing things. No, I didn't see it that way. I just felt for Uncle Koiki, who thought that he had this land. He actually lost his case, and he passed on before the decision was born. Yeah. His particular dispute he had lost. So there were some issues there which I won't speak about. It
was bittersweet, wasn't it?
It was bittersweet, yeah, for the family, and most of the people there couldn't really understand what it was about. They said, well, we used to fish before and we fish now. We did this and before and we do this now. So what's the difference? And this is where I think education and access to universities and the the pathways that have been created for our young people will make a difference, because in the future, or at least now and in the future, we are negotiating not from a position of, I'm not sure if to say total ignorance, because that sounds disrespectful to our elders, but with a better sense of understanding of how Anglo-Australian and the English culture and legal system works in such a coercive kind of way.
Yeah. I think it's a reality across the whole of society, really. I think that most of us, and I include myself in that, don't have a deep understanding of the actual legal structures that govern us. And I guess one of the great things about the democratic process that we're currently talking about and we're engaging in right now is that it actually gives us an opportunity to try and understand that better, because there are very few moments in life, unless you are a legal scholar like yourself, where you actually even have the time or the need to engage with those sorts of things. But anyway, Marcia, you're going to say something.
Yes, sir, but with respect, it gives 97% of people the democratic right to determine what is right for 3% of the people. So
yeah,
I hear what you're saying, but I would like to respectfully disagree with the conclusion of what you're saying.
Asmi, good point. I think many of us in the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities are feeling particularly resentful that a majority non-Indigenous population will decide our future. And given the extent of the lying and confusion caused by the No campaigners, particularly the opposition spokesman or leader of the opposition, Peter Dutton, the opposition spokesperson for Indigenous Affairs, Senator Jacinta Price, and Warren Mundine, just outright lying and deceiving the public to vote no. There's a huge amount of resentment about that, and yet here we are facing a failed referendum. How will we be able to recover from a majority no vote?
Auntie, personally, I look to people like you and others like Eileen Morton Robinson, and I know Uncle Michael Mansell's on the other side of this, but people like you who have been pushed down 1,000 times, got up and kept walking. I will keep looking to people like yourself. I'm maybe hoping against hope that people get up on the 14th and, I don't know, some angel of goodness comes and whispers into their hearts that they shouldn't believe the lies that they've been told. Maybe that's not going to happen, but, and if it doesn't, then on the 15th, I know that we're going to meet with the law students up in Sydney, have a meeting and tell them, look, like a child, when we fall, we get up, we start walking again. Our elders didn't give up. Let's cry a bit and then dry our tears and then continue.
So here we are a few days out from the referendum. If you had the opportunity today to speak to an undecided voter or even a no voter, what would you say to that person?
What I say to them, Auntie, when I've been at meetings is, this takes nothing away from you. It gives Aboriginal people something. It gives them what every other community has. The founders allowed you to do this through the way they entrenched the race powers in the Constitution and the change to the Constitution. This is an opportunity for you to show that after 200 years, when you talk about human rights and when you talk about all of these other things, that you take it to heart and that you extend that right to these people as well. That you extend the right to Indigenous people, rights that everybody else enjoys. So please vote yes.
thank you very much, Asmi.
Yeah, thanks, Asmi.
It's been a wonderful interview with you. Good to hear you talking about your take on the law. That's really fabulous.